Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation podcast network.
Over-the-counter medication feels a little more powerful in India than it does over here. But here, although I'm glad that I have access to prescription medication, which is much more targeted towards migraine, newer meds, it's really hard to navigate the system. It's hard to find the right doctor. It's hard to advocate for yourself.
Welcome to Talking Head Pain, the podcast that confronts head pain head-on. I'm your host, Sarah Shaw, Senior Manager of BIPOC Community Outreach at the Global Healthy Living Foundation. I have been living with chronic migraine for almost 10 years, and I'm very open about navigating life with my chronic disease journey as well as my experience living with anxiety. This podcast will be a window into other patients' lives as they navigate their own journeys living with chronic pain, migraine, and mental health. Today, we're joined by Shruti, a migraine and mental health advocate who we've had on the podcast before, and we're so excited to have her back on. Shruti, how are your pain levels today?
Today is a green day, so I'm enjoying that.
Awesome, green. And can you talk a little bit about, for people maybe that don't know the stoplight symptoms, what a green day is like?
Okay. Basically, the stoplight scale functions as red is when your symptoms are too high, so you have to stop. Yellow, orange for when your symptoms are more than baseline. You can be functional, but you might have to slow down. And green is you are symptomatic, but you can be completely functional for as much as possible. And for those of us with chronic pain, it's a fairly good day.
Great. No, I appreciate that explanation. I think a lot of people might relate to that. And one of the things that I like to start the show off with is by asking the question, if you could use one word or adjective to describe your migraine attacks, what word would you use?
I'm stumped right now because I've been reframing migraines. I don't want to look at it as debilitating or anything, but I remember reading a long time ago about full-blown assault on the body, and it pretty much feels like that. It does feel like an assault, but also more like this annoying roommate who doesn't pay rent and who doesn't want to get out. So that's not one word, but that's how it's described.
I'll take that. I will take the annoying roommate that shows up, doesn't pay rent, doesn't give you
personal space,
right? It's always there. I know some people name their migraine attacks and call them certain names. So I think that's a very visual representation. Doesn't clean up after themselves, makes you take medicine. So I appreciate that. So for those of you that have been following Talking Head Pain for a while now, we've had Shruti on the podcast before. And in that episode, you were very vulnerable and shared with us the realities of mental health and migraine. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank you, number one, for being so open and vulnerable with us and sharing with followers, to know that it's not easy, but that they're not alone. And I know you shared with us that was the first time you had kind of opened up about the realities of mental health and migraine. And my focus for these episodes is to allow our guests to talk about the intersection of mental health and migraine. I think it's such an important topic that often doesn't get talked about. And so I think the more and more that we talk about it, and it happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month, I think it's very fitting. I am especially really drawn to the work that you're doing with Chronically Met from both your website and Instagram page, especially the message that you share with your followers about it's okay to not be okay. I would love it if you would just share with us why you started your page and why the focus on migraine and mental health.
So first of all, thank you for giving me the platform the first time. And it's because I had that platform, I was able to confront whatever I'd been through. So which is why, and it was so easy talking to you and Joe. So it was so easy to open up and be vulnerable about it. So why I started this. I was in a really dark place. I have lived with migraine since I was a child. And for most part, at least for 30 years, I thought that was normal. I thought my pain was normal and something was wrong with me and that I was lazy, that I was not able to keep up. And as the symptoms got worse and worse, I just kept pushing myself and things just snowballed. And I still didn't stop until I hit burnout. Lucky for me, or unlucky in a way, I moved countries exactly at that point. And I was able to take a break because I had a kid that I had to take care of. But it was also a very scary period of time because I did not have my support system. My husband and I were new here. He had his own stress from work and trying to keep us all afloat and all that. And I had been off of my medication for a year because of pregnancy. So migraine got really bad. My mental health also is something that I've struggled since I was a kid. Again, we can talk about that later. But this was a period of time when I was on no medication, had no support, had nobody who would understand. Not that I had people who understood before, but it just felt very real. I felt very isolated. And I did ask for help because I've been quite intuitive about my health before. I've been intuitive, and the voices in my head start saying, hey, maybe it's time to quit, can't do this anymore. But I didn't get the help. Like I asked my doctor, I tried all the helplines, I didn't get the help. And I ended up overdosing on meds because my brain just said, okay, this is it. I don't want to live anymore. And when I survived that, when I got through that, I realized that I was not alone because I was introduced to a community of people who felt the same way. That was the first time I heard someone say, hey, I'm having memory issues because of migraine. Hey, my pain is so bad that I can't get out of bed. Or as simple as, I'm not able to engage my kid, or I'm not able to do laundry. Those things felt so isolating. It felt like my own struggle and only my struggle. And it felt like I was a failure. It was really hard for me to deal with. So when I met the community, I realized, okay, I'm not alone. And that changed everything for me. Just knowing that I wasn't alone. And then I heard someone else's story. She said, I've been living with this for a long time. I've been to every doctor. The doctor says he can't do anything for me. And I asked him, okay, I can't live like this. Can you help me die? And he gave me the number for medical assistance in dying. And I thought, a doctor shouldn't be doing that. Like, nobody should be doing that. Having been through it myself, I knew even at that point that there is another way. I just wish someone would show me the way. So I didn't want another person to feel that way again. And migraine is invisible, and the mental health impact of it is very real, especially because it's invisible. So I started the page just to share my story and let people know that they're not alone.
I'm so glad that you're here with us today and that you have created your Instagram account and your blog page. You're absolutely right, knowing that you are not the only one going through these symptoms, because when you live with migraine, sometimes it feels like you're living in a bubble because, like you said, it is so invisible. So you could be walking down the street in a migraine attack and you wouldn't know the person, in the same office as you, in the same building, in the same community, in the same mom group as you, is also living with this debilitating illness. And we're all kind of walking around alone. And that's not how we have to be. And I remember I relate a lot to your story because that's how I felt. I was in my very early 20s when I started getting my first migraine attack. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I so sick? But so many of my other friends are still going out. They're still doing things. They're going to weddings. They're going to places that I couldn't be in anymore. And I really thought like I was the only young person in the world living with migraine, because you go to the waiting rooms and you look around and you're like, I'm the youngest person here. And I think what I found, like you, was finding that online community of support. And I think that's what your page does for people. I think that's what drew me to your page, where I was like, oh my gosh, finally, like somebody else that is talking about the very serious implications of mental health and migraine, because the two are comorbidities. They go hand in hand. If you're in pain and it's not seen and it's not validated by doctors, by your family members, by your friends, you're going to feel very alone. And so I think these communities that we've found are super important to our mental health. And so I think the posts that you create let other people like really know. I think the illustrations just show they're not the only ones going through something like that. And you mentioned that you were moving countries right around the time that your migraine attacks started to get worse. And I know, for those of you who don't know, I know that Shruti is originally from India and now you're currently living in Canada. I know you talked a little bit about it on the last podcast episode, but do you mind sharing with us your experience of navigating the healthcare system in India versus navigating the healthcare system in Canada?
It is so different. I mean, I've been asked this question multiple times. It's been hard to answer it because it's so different. India has got so many doctors. Like, we have clinics on every street. We can walk and knock on a doctor's door and ask to be seen right now. Canada, I have to wait a year and a half to see a specialist. I need a referral from a GP. I have to convince the GP that I need to see that specialist. It's really hard for me to navigate the system that way. But when it comes to taking care of myself, I keep weighing this. I don't know which is better in a way. India is not as educated about migraine. The doctors themselves aren't as educated about it. So I was on prescription medication for a very long time, and the same medication, which is probably not prescribed as much today. I was not educated on medication overuse headache or medication of adaptation headache. I was not told that I shouldn't be on the prescription medication for that long, and it will cause issues with, let's say, kidney and liver and heart and have side effects or, long-term use. So I was not educated on all that, and that ended up adding to the disease. So migraine was actually not in control at all. All those years that I was on medication, we just kept increasing the dosage every single year until I hit a limit. And every time I went back, I said, this is not helping at all. But nobody told me that there's something else we can try, because there isn't much available there. I mean, the
Right.
CGRPs and other stuff is not available there.
They're not there
Yeah.
yet. No.
And neurologists don't think migraine is exciting enough to treat. There's still a lot of stigma. So you're sent back home with the message that, hey, you just have to live with this. And it's common. But when it came to alternative remedies, that was easier for me to access. When I was in pain, I'd just go to the salon and the spa and get a massage. I'd go get, acupressure. I would find different ways to relieve myself for the headache in the moment. Even over-the-counter medication feels a little more powerful in India than it does over here. But here, although I'm glad that I have access to prescription medication, which is much more targeted towards migraine, newer meds, it's really hard to navigate the system. It's hard to find the right doctor. It's hard to advocate for yourself because they don't want to listen to you for more than 15 minutes. I mean, even if your appointment is 15 minutes long, you're out in 5 or 4 minutes even. And that just feels really unsupportive. Like, it's not enough. And on the other hand, with medication, you have to prove to your insurance provider that you need it, even after your doctor prescribes it. Like, I've had a year-long fight to get my current medication. So that's been really stressful and taxing. With alternative health remedies, it's been so difficult to be able to pay for it because tax in Canada is really high. Regardless of how much you make, half of it goes in tax, 40% of it goes in rent. The rest of it goes in groceries and everything. So it's really hard to pay for the tools that you need to treat yourself, even if you don't have your prescription medication. So yeah, I try to have the best of both worlds in a way. That way I feel I'm lucky. So I have a therapist in India. So therapy really helps me with, managing the stress and the mental health aspect of it. I do get a lot of herbs and all that from India, let's say pain balms and stuff. And every time I visit, at least this time that I was there, I went and got a massage almost every single day. So that would have cost me nearly like tens of thousands of dollars over here. Over there, I was able to do it in like less than 500 for the entire visit. So yeah.
Wow. You had a lot of really important things. First, you're talking about your doctor's appointments and how they were only 5 to 10 minutes long. And I think that point is something that is being felt across, at least I know in the US too, there's not enough neurologists, there's not enough doctors anymore, and our healthcare systems are starting to become very overwhelmed. And I think that it's now trickling down to affecting patients, to affecting patient care, where doctors are having to rush through their appointments because there's just not enough time to see the heavily influx of patients dealing with migraine conditions. The second thing that you mentioned, which I'm so glad, is that you are seeing a therapist, and you're seeing a therapist in India, and you're adding to your migraine toolkit of, massages and herbal remedies. And I think that a lot of people think that there's only one way to treat migraine, but I think having a toolkit, like for me, my therapist is part of my migraine toolkit. My partner is part of my migraine toolkit. My peppermint oil is part of my migraine toolkit to make sure that I am trying to live and navigate the world as best as I can while living with a condition where you're in some amount of pain or nausea or brain fog or light sensitivity. It affects every part of our day, even if it's not just pain. The brain fog for me is sometimes the thing that I struggle with the most, especially the post-drome of that feeling of feeling drowsiness and like dizziness and confusion and trying to like navigate and speak coherently, where I'm like, I forgot the word for this and I apologize, and saying that in meetings, but normalizing it by talking about it more, I think has allowed me to take back the power a little bit of like, I'm going to talk about this. This is who I am and this is how I live. And I just happen to be a person that lives with anxiety and migraine. And here I am. I want to switch gears and talk about something that is really important to me. And I think something that I don't know if you realize you're doing, but is so important. And it's about your Instagram account and your comics. And I take such joy in like reading and seeing your illustrations. I'm such a nerd. I love comic books. And so anytime I see any kind of comic that's related to someone living with a chronic illness, I get excited because I'm like, look, it's someone like me in a comic living with a disability or living with a chronic illness. But what speaks to me the most is that your comics reflect you as a woman of color. And that is so important because I don't think there are many spaces out there that intersect both chronic pain and being a woman of color. Usually the illustrations are all white people. And it means a lot as a Black woman to see a brown woman comic where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to share this because it's going to make people feel seen and feel heard. I want to know why it was important for you to make sure that your illustrations reflect you as not what you typically see online.
First of all, thank you for being kind and, all the compliments. I'm not good with hearing good things about me. I don't know how to respond to that. It's a part of the imposter syndrome and the anxiety and everything that comes along. So, two things. The reason I chose to illustrate, and I'm not an illustrator, it was not a part of whatever I did. I'm actually a writer and I could really write well and I could be sarcastic and funny and however I wanted. But I realized people like me, probably like me, don't have much of an attention span. So, this is the best way. And even for me, when I was writing, I just lose track of my thoughts and I was not able to write. So this was easier. And doodling was a way for me to reclaim my childhood. It was something that I really enjoyed doing as a child, art. And I stopped doing once migraine hit. I can literally remember it was 7th grade and I completely stopped. So this is a way for me to reclaim that. And when I started illustrating, I didn't think I'd actually create characters. I just wanted to share it in whatever words, text, textual form. But the more I did it, the more I really wanted to put a character out there. So people have something funny, relatable, explaining something that's morbid and depressing, just a combination of that, trying to lighten the situation and talk about things like how we talk about them in our heads. When I first started doing it, I did not use color because it was just doing the doodle itself was taxing for me. So color felt like more effort. So I just left it. And someone commented saying, but hey, you're a person of color and this is a representation of, all white people. And I understood how important that was. And I took that feedback and I saw, thanks to you, that being a person of color has its own issues and its own struggles. I recognized that I was being discriminated against and I was facing challenges in the healthcare system or even otherwise. And I saw that there was nobody who looked like me in this space talking about migraine. So I just wanted to be that for others. So I wanted to tell the story as myself. That was the best way I could do it.
I'm such a fan of that and your story, and I'm so glad that you continued your doodling hobby after having to put it down for so long. And I think that I'm no artist, I'm no doodler, but that's something that I've always wanted. I was like, I wish I could doodle. I wish I could do that. So anytime I see comics or representation of someone in a chronic illness space that kind of reflects and looks like me, it's so important. And so I'm so excited that you took that feedback and that you made it into you and you made it into your own. You made this character who's now this representation of, brown people out there. And I think, you mentioned that you were talking about Migrant India and allowing people to kind of see themselves in your art will encourage them to wait a minute, like this person has these conditions and is taking it seriously and is going to the doctor and getting treatment. Maybe I should also, it is more than quote unquote just a headache. It is invisible, that can't be seen, but there are options out there to get better treatment.
I'll be honest, one of the reasons why I didn't want to use color, apart from, of course, not having the energy to do it, was I felt like an imposter in many ways. I felt like there's nobody looking like me out there. So maybe my story wouldn't be taken as seriously, or maybe I'll get laughed at. That's always in my mind. Like every day when I doodle and I put in the color, I think maybe I should just leave it white. And when I question that thought, that's when I end up at this answer. Maybe it'll reach more people if it was white. So it's just the conditioning that I'm trying to unpack, all the internalized racism and everything that I have learned and I've grown up with. Just trying to unpack that and pushing on and trying to represent people so that more people, not just in India, I think across the world, especially in the East, we are taught not to complain about our pain. We talked about this before. We've had so much intergenerational trauma, and it was hard for people to get food. That was something they would struggle with. It was hard for people to survive. They've been through all of this, so they would never complain about pain. My grandma had 16 kids.
Wow.
She had no opportunity to complain about pain.
Right.
So when I started complaining of pain, people would say, oh, but your grandmother was so active until she was 80. And that's when I realized that nobody was ever given the space, and it's okay for us to complain about pain. It's easy for us to believe that we are drama queens and we're just being lazy, or we're being overly melodramatic and we're just seeking attention. It's easy to believe that because so many people are telling you. But there came a point when I realized it's okay.
Right.
Every generation has its struggle. Their struggle was, this is my struggle. And they've done so much to bring me here. So it's okay for me to take another step forward for, let's say, my daughter, so that tomorrow she can complain about, hey, sun is too bright, or whatever she wants to,
I think you brought up a really, really important point about generational trauma and the differences that the generations before us had to go through and struggle with, and us breaking those, I don't want to call them chains, but what our generations before us had to go through. We are breaking that cycle by saying that we don't have to go through that because we now have the resources. There's advocacy groups out there now. There's other resources that are out there now that unfortunately our parents and our grandparents did not have access to. And what better, like as we get more access to treatments and medications and advocacy and learning how to use our voice for good. For me, I take that with, I'm doing this not only for myself, but for the generations that came before me, because they did not have that access. I think that's such a beautiful thing that you're doing to break the chains for your daughter, coming up as well.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think they did their best to bring us here where we don't have to worry about food. We don't have to worry about freedom of speech and all those things. So we can now look at the other issues. We can now normalize mental health. We can normalize migraine at work. We can normalize migraine at school, having a chronic illness and living with it. So my hope is just to make this world more inclusive and more compassionate towards people like us, at least for my daughter's generation, if not ours. And I'm sure it's happening. Like I can see a lot of changes in the past 2 years alone, but I hope we can do more.
Absolutely. That was so beautiful. I have one last question. We're going to round it up. I know that with living with chronic illness like migraine, it can be very isolating and lonely. What self-care tips do you do for yourself to make sure that you are taking care of you?
I used to do a lot of things before I had a daughter, and then I didn't have time for anything. So I found little things like taking an hour for myself in the morning to just sit and enjoy the birds singing or maybe listen to the train. And then I started adding one after the other. I have a morning routine where I wake up, I make tea, I juice the celery because I start my day with a lot of water. And then I sit and read a book or I doodle as I'm sitting in the balcony, regardless of what weather it is. I watch TV when I can. I take a walk with my dog. Self-care can be taking a nap for me. Like I take a nap before my daughter comes home from school. And it's often saying no to things. So it's often giving myself permission to say no, permission to just be selfish. So that's something that I've really worked on and I'm proud of. because I can't burn out again. And you shouldn't have to burn out to know that you have to take care of yourself and put yourself first.
Absolutely.
Unless you take care of yourself, you can't really take care of anybody else. You can't be there for anybody else.
As I say to a lot of people, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? When our cup is full and when our cup is empty, it produces different kinds of results. And when you're pouring from an empty cup, the end result is not good on either end. So I'm really glad to hear you say that you are prioritizing yourself. You're making yourself number one. You're putting up boundaries to protect your cup, to make sure your cup stays full. So I think that that's a beautiful message for our listeners. Well, Shruti, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show again today. It was a pleasure having you on, and I learned something new and just become so inspired by your messages that you share with not only our listeners, but your followers everywhere.
Thank you so much for the opportunity again. It's always a joy talking to you.
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you for listening to this episode of Talking Head Pain, the podcast that confronts head pain head on. If you like this episode, please give it an honest 5-star rating, write a positive review, and spread the word by sharing with your friends and family. It'll help more people like you find us. I'm Sarah Shaw, and I will see you next time.
Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation podcast network.